You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV TRI-STATE.
Broke the story on local homestead tax credit fiasco. Expose the Evansville Redevelopment Commission excessive spending habits.
Your community watchdog. CityCountyObserver.com is your online community newspaper dedicated to the progress of Evansville and Vanderburgh County. We're a nonpartisan publication providing insight into political issues and events that shape our community. We are a watchdog for you, the citizen. Check us out online, city-countyobserver.com. That's city-countyobserver.com.
Tri-State Voices, an open discussion with area leaders on issues affecting communities throughout the Tri-State. Now, here's your host, Mike Woods.
Good morning. Welcome to Tri-State Voices. Hi, I'm your host, Mike Woods. Tri-State Voices is jointly sponsored by WTSN, the City Council Observer, and my office, Woods & Woods. Every week we talk to a leader in the Tri-State concerning issues that are important to all of us. Today I'm honored to have Andrew Horning, the Libertarian candidate for Congress. Too many people think there's only two political parties. There's nothing in the Constitution that says that. And as Andrew Horning will tell you, there's a lot of different alternatives out there, different alternatives to problems we have, different alternatives to interpretations of the Constitution. Andy, I guess maybe the first place to start is I got to tell you, you're up from Freedom, Indiana. It's the same place where Christy Risk and Andrew McNeil is. You guys are not much on the typical Republican and Democrat approach to politics. Is there something in the water there that's different? Or?
Well, you know, Freedom, Indiana, and Freeland and Freelandville, there are a lot of these freeman communities that started after the Civil War. Freedom was one of them, and I don't know if there's just something about, you know, the name Freedom that resonates in people, but it sure does in me, and that's a powerful thing.
Well, the interesting thing, when I interviewed Andrew McNeil a few weeks ago and Christy Risk a couple years ago when she was running for Congress, none of you have any problem telling what you think. Where sometimes I interview Republicans and Democrats and they kind of soft soap it and want to dance around the edges. You guys just blast away. So.
I will blast away. And in fact, one of those things I want to blast away on is, you know, this whole idea of the two-party system, and that, you know, we've been given this, we've been taught it, we've been told this, as if somebody's trying to hammer into our heads that you have only two options. When you consider a dozen presidents, starting from George Washington forward, were warning us about they warned us against the entrenchment of factions. They warned us about, you know, the dangers of political parties, and that I think most people, if they interrogated their own thoughts at all, they would understand that the whole idea of these abstractions or idols, you know, if you want to call it that, of political parties, kind of crazy. And that there's not much good to say about it, other than the fact that, you know, people assume that there's some kind of vetting that takes place, and that they assume that there's some advantage to having this huge organization behind you, when in most cases, if you think, you know, what we already know about how from the precinct committee level on up, which, by the way, only Democrats and Republicans are allowed to have precinct committeemen with special powers and all of that stuff. The way they've written themselves special powers into law and make it much harder for any alternatives to compete against them, I shouldn't be the one who's having to explain my position on the ballot as an alternative to this. It's my thinking, you know, really, that anybody who wants to vote Democrat or Republican now has got some explaining to do. What is your excuse for throwing your vote away again? I think especially anybody, if you're a Democrat and you like socialism, you're getting what you want. You know, they promise you socialism and they give it to you good and hard. And Republicans, on the other hand, I guess I really wonder, what are you guys thinking? When you think about what a Republican says versus what they've been delivering, look at any graphs, look at spending charts, you know, look at the debt, look at the number of pages added to the Federal Register under Democrats or Republicans. It's the same accelerating rate of growth. And the chart has been going like this. And you know, you think about, when do you ever see charts go like this? What happens after they go like this? Bam! You know, we're about to have a major conflagration. And I guess I wonder what anybody could be thinking when you're looking at the opportunity for peaceful revolution, which is really, when you think about what our form of government is all about, what the elections were all about. Our founding fathers were not idiots. They understood that over half the population is average intelligence or below. And so, you know, you're thinking they wanted this for some reason. They wanted this sort of mass phenomenon of elections to determine the outcome of our political order for one reason, that this is a peaceful means of revolution. You don't have to pick up your guns to fire the bad guys. You just say, press a button, or you fill out a ballot and you say, no thank you, get rid of this guy, I want this guy instead. That's how this is supposed to work. Now, what we've been doing for the past 100 years is using Election Day as just another day, like tax day, like every day that we're paying into the system when we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and, you know, obeying speed limits and all of this kind of stuff. It's another day of capitulation to the status quo. It's another day where we just say attaboy to all of the people that we've been warned by people like, you know, Eisenhower 50 years ago, or you know, you think even Woodrow Wilson told us about the evil men who had taken over our government. Even Woodrow Wilson understood that the corruption in our government was thick, and that was 100 years ago. So for people now to look at what we have this option for a peaceful revolution, and to use it as just another attaboy to all of the people that have already bought and paid for the Democrat and Republican parties a long time ago. Those are the people that have some explaining to do.
Well, how would the Libertarian Party be different if they had power?
Well, first of all, think about you know, what we really have. I think most people, unfortunately, think that there's an awful lot of ideology going on in politics. There isn't. You know, the false dichotomies between Democrat and Republicans should be obvious by now. You know, the fact that they do the same things is because of what we really have is crony capitalism. What we really have is a political order that is propped up by the corporate interests, which, you know, corporations and government, you know, really have been hand in glove for a long time, as we were warned about from long ago. You had lots of people like Jefferson and others warning us about the problems of fascism. They didn't use that term, but, you know, the corporatism that, you know, and the fascism that Mussolini coined were really, they've always been around, you know. And
when you hear the phrase of some politician, they talk about a private-public partnership. What does that mean to you?
It means crony capitalism. Now, libertarians are all about the free market. I guess I better define that first. A free market is pure capitalism, or a truly free market, even better than the, you know, capitalism is a means of raising money for certain, you know, for raising money for business propositions. Free market is more expansive than that. A free market means all trade is purely voluntary and to mutual benefit, where there's no coercion involved, no government guns involved, no policeman banging you over the head if you do it wrong. Basically, it means that if I wanted to trade something with you, we can use conch shells, we can use money, I can trade you a trailer for a goat. You know, that's free market in a nutshell. So you go to a farmer's market, you get on Craigslist and you want to trade stuff. That's free market in microcosm. If we had that all over the place, we wouldn't have this, you know, crony capitalism we have right now, because it would not be allowed. You wouldn't have government. You know, if we did the Constitution, for instance, if we just did the Constitution, doggone it, as written, we would not have all of these special powers for special people. One of the fundamentals behind both our state and federal constitutions, if you look in the 14th Amendment or Article 1, Section 23 of the Indiana Constitution, you'll see that equality under law is supposed to be by law. That's supposed to be something that we are granted and guaranteed by the constitutions of both Indiana and the United States of America. So that equality under law is an underpinning of everything that I'm all about, everything that the libertarians are all about. Equality under law. What the Democrats and the Republicans are all about now is special deals for special people. So if you're connected...
Let me ask you about that. We've got a deal here in Evansville where the mayor proposed a downtown hotel.
Oh, yes.
And then and of course he's Republican, the city council is 8-1 Democrat. And there's going to be at least some government subsidies to that hotel. There's a lot of the owners of hotels, particularly on the east side, that basically they're saying, hey, it's not fair for the government to subsidize a hotel that's competing with me. But you had a Republican proposed it, 8-1 Democrat city council, they approved it. If the Libertarian Party was in power, would they approve a deal like that?
Of course not. No, absolutely not. You know, the idea here is that if you think about it, You think you have these big mall developers, or you have these large corporate interests. They give money to both Democrats and Republicans because they don't care who wins. They just want to know that whoever wins is going to pick up the phone when they call. And that is a fundamental problem with this so-called two-party system. It's been bought off a long time ago. Now, I'm not saying that the Libertarian Party wouldn't eventually be bought off too if we let it. But the issue really is with voters. It's not even with, you know, the political parties themselves. It's that we have an expectation of corruption in our culture, where we all know that this is corrupt, and yet we vote for it anyway. The big change, if I were to win an election, would not be me. The big change would be in voters who have said, we've had it. This is enough. You know, no more Democrat. Just imagine the day after Election Day, if I won Congress. You know, voters said, no Democrat, no Republican, you know, that we're saying no to this, no to that, and yes to something else. You think that would not resonate in Washington, D.C. from the top all the way down? I mean, there'd be cracks in marble everywhere. That would be a huge, you know, a sea change in voters. And I would not have to, all I'd have to do is not screw up. I go to Washington, D.C. with a mandate unlike anybody else there would have. Democrats and Republicans would be there because Democrats and Republicans have been there for 100 years. And that would just be another attaboy that sent them there. If I got sent to Washington, D.C., it would be on a wave of disgust. And that would be a powerful thing. So just imagine the power I would have is one vote in 435, you know. It's not like the vote numbers would change here. But what would happen is I would have a microphone in my face all the time, unlike every other Democrat and Republican who just got elected for the first time, because this would represent something different that voters had finally done. Voters finally said, I've had it, in a substantial way. Instead of just saying, you know, we're going to send a different Democrat, a different Republican, this is going to be a different party for the first time in 100 years. That would be powerful.
You know, over 60 years ago, Eisenhower spoke many, many times about the military-industrial complex. Is that term still relevant today? Is it still as dangerous now as when Eisenhower talked about it back then?
More relevant than ever. I mean, you look to see what we have now crossing the boundaries of posse comitatus and stuff. Now that we have our police forces now equipped like armies in other nations would be envious. You know, you had a former mayor of New York City bragging about how his police force in New York City was the 5th biggest army in the world. 5th biggest army in the world, and that's a police force. Now, you know, we've seen how, like in Boston, after the Boston bombing, boom, out of nowhere, you've got SWAT teams and tanks and all these people rolling through in this. Why did you even have to have black outfits? Even the Imperial Stormtroopers in Star Wars wore white. I mean, these guys are wearing, they're wearing black, wearing these scary outfits with deadly looking stuff. What is this about? Are we being protected from? I mean, and who's really protecting who? Is our government protecting itself against us? This is what Eisenhower was warning us about. You know, the unwarranted influence of the military-industrial complex. When he was talking about that, remember, this was after World War II. This is a general now. You know, this guy was, you know, the leader of the forces in Europe. You know, this was not just some, you know, low-ranking soldiers. This guy knew what he was talking about. Plus, he rose to the top of the visible order of American political power. So here's a guy that got to the very top of the political order, and he was telling us to look behind the curtain, that there are bad guys that are really calling the shots to a very large degree. And if you follow the money in political campaigns these days to see how, you know, people actually get propped up into power, how these people are actually manipulated, you know, back in Eisenhower's time, remember, we were still, you know, still fresh with the J. Edgar Hoover manipulations of Congress, where, you know, even before the NSA became a big deal, even before we knew anything about Snowden and all of this stuff, our spies were manipulating politicians. And when you have that kind of power available to those who have enough money, and if you have, you know, this history of central banking that, you know, our country's been fighting from the very beginning, where you have, you know, even more than military-industrial complex, even more than that, from the very beginning, before the beginning of our country, when we were still working with like colonial scrip versus British pounds, people were talking about the dangers of the banking system and things like fractional reserve banking or the moneyed interests of Europe that had funded both sides of wars because they didn't care who won the war. They made their money off of debt. And the service on that debt was something that they made that's how they actually got rich. And so when you have, somebody like a Rothschild says, give me the power over a nation's currency and I care not who writes its laws, that's power. That's what Eisenhower was alluding to. That's what Wilson was alluding to when he was talking about the evil men who had taken over our country. That's what, even you had people like Kennedy talking about the secret societies. We've had a dozen presidents warning us to look behind the curtain of power. These are guys that got to the top and they said they're guys that scare me. And that's a president saying that. It's one thing if I talk conspiracy theory, okay, you can say I've got a tinfoil hat. But when presidents do this, we should be listening. And we've been warned for generations now about central banking and about the military-industrial complex. And those two things, in the words of people like Jefferson and Madison, when they had talked about, even within the context of the Alien and Sedition Acts, the danger of giving this kind of power to factions, and then those factions selling out to other factions behind the scenes, and you have shadow governments then developing. That danger is ancient, it's pernicious, and it is apparently here in the United States today. And that's, something that we really should be thinking about when we're casting our votes. Do we want to be keeping this status quo going when obviously we're headed towards trouble? You're looking at instability in the falling value of the dollar. Our purchasing, value is just shot for the U.S. dollar. And you think about how many people are unemployed right now, what rates, we say the disparity in wealth, that's one thing. The disparity in rights, the disparity in power between individuals, where you've got people who are politically connected that can get away with literal murder, and you've got people who have, no political connection, and they can't get away with anything. And, the way that we are treated so unequally under the law, and we're so, disparate, and the gap is growing between rich and poor, and the middle class is shrinking, we should be looking at using our vote for something other than just another capitulation.
Well, let me ask you on a bunch of just real specific issues, how you would change things. Like, let's start, for example, with marijuana. Some laws, some states, it's legal now. Some states, it's decriminalized. Some, like Indiana, it's illegal. They actually put you in jail. How would the Libertarian Party change the laws on marijuana?
Well, first of all, before we talk about the laws, we have to understand that, a lot of laws are not legal by the constitutions. I'm a constitutionalist in so much as I would actually keep my oath to the thing. You swear an oath to obey and, support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And what we have right now is a situation where lawmakers are spitting out laws like watermelon seeds that are in violation of the Constitution. So by Article 1, Section 25 of the Indiana Constitution, or by the 10th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, most of the laws on the books today are illegal. They're unconstitutional. They're in violation of authority granted by the Constitution. So when people talk about legalizing marijuana, that's actually incorrect. It would be more correct to say decriminalization, because remember, with the first prohibition, when we made it illegal to sell liquor, if you're going to do something stupid, the correct way to do it is to amend the Constitution. And they did that with the 18th Amendment. So they wrote the 18th Amendment, therefore it is illegal to do the following thing. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment, and nothing since has replaced it. So understanding that it was necessary to amend the Constitution to make the sale of anything illegal, that was correct. We've made lots of things illegal in the years since the 21st Amendment without amending any Constitution. That's incorrect, that's illegal, that's unconstitutional. So we never should have made, this whole business of reefer madness and all of that stuff. First of all, medically, that's wrong. Medically, marijuana is actually a very good medicine, even if you ask people like Dr. Oz, who's changed his mind on that, by the way. And he's very much a proponent of using it as a medicine. I'm not much into decriminalization of marijuana. That's not one of my big issues. It never was. I do not like a lot of what we call, illegal drugs. But being a constitutionalist, there is no equivocation on the idea that if we wanted to make it illegal, we still have work to do. There's a proper way to do it, and we haven't done it. So, the idea that it is illegal and we put people in jail in this land of the free with the world's highest percentage of citizens in prison. We don't need more things that are illegal, but if we're going to do it, we should do it legitimately by amending a constitution, any constitution. Give me a break. Pick one. Amend the federal constitution, amend the Indiana Constitution, but go legit. Government, even more than the rest of us, should be kept on some kind of leash of law. And when you consider how dangerous governments are when they breach this kind of, when they breach the rules of some kind, when they have no limits on their authority, that's the means of oppression, slavery, genocide, and war. We should be careful with that stuff. And we should put government on a leash of law. And nobody's come up with a better one than our constitutions, so I'm saying let's stick to that. So when it comes to something like marijuana, it was never criminalized. It was never made illegal. So until we get ourselves straight, until we go legit, we need to kick a lot of people out of prison who don't really need to be there. We need to, stop this use of police forces for stuff that we don't need, concentrate on things like murder and rape and that kind of stuff where there are serious victims here. I'll just put it out blunt. Libertarians believe that there should be very few crimes. Where there is a crime, there is a victim. If there is a victim, we should be very harsh on that. If somebody's stealing stuff, if they're defrauding stuff, if they're murdering, those are the people we should be going after. Now, it's very unfortunate that right now one of the biggest defrauders of people is our own government. But what we need to do is understand that there is such a thing as real crime, and then there's such a thing as just infractions of regulations that make no constitutional sense or authority.
What about abortion and other issues like that where you're talking about an individual wants to do this and the government for whatever reason wants to stop them? And that's what I say with marijuana, abortion, riding motorcycles without helmets, that sort of thing. Generally speaking, how would the Libertarian Party handle those issues?
Well, I think it's pretty predictable. If you think about, libertarianism is at its root anti-violence. And where you have to invoke the violence of government, just even a speeding ticket, if you're just putting it in the simplest terms, if you're stopped by a cop for any reason at all, you risk death somehow. He could tase you and, kill you or whatever if things go sour. So there's always the risk of death. We want to minimize that interaction between, this violent arm of government coming down on you and when, just use it for when it has to come out. We believe the sword of state should be drawn only when absolutely necessary. So if there is something like, murder, rape, stealing, defrauding, whatever, devaluing your property even, something like that, that is a legitimate use for government to protect your body and your property from somebody who would initiate force against it. That is, at its heart, what libertarianism is all about. So minimizing that use of government force. So when it comes to things like abortion, libertarians are actually split. I'm very pro-life. I think at the core of my ethos, you have to be pro-life. If you're really libertarian top to bottom, you got to be pro-life. And I know a lot of libertarians agree with me. Now, when do you bring in government to do something about that, though? Now, I guess I have to say, running for a federal office, I don't believe the federal government has any business in even murder, and unless it crosses states' lines, it just isn't a federal issue. So abortion is not something that I believe should be a federal issue at all. So that, just on that one issue, I'm afraid the federal government has no authority, zero.
You just totally leave that to the states, and then if some states wanted to outlaw it, they could. If some states that wanted to be legal, they could.
So in other words, Roe v. Wade was an unconstitutional decision from the beginning, and I am against Roe v. Wade, which makes some people mad at me. But I'm very pro-life, and I'm not going to hedge on that. But I also believe the federal government has, zero authority to write any legislation to prohibit it. So while Roe v. Wade is unconstitutional, it's also unconstitutional for the government to have anything else to say about it.
How would you change the military or foreign policy? We spend somewhere around $600 billion a year to run our military. I think it's maybe 40% of what the entire Earth spends. And then, of course, that's tied directly into our foreign policy. What would you change?
Peace, commerce, and I guess I don't know about the honest friendship entangling alliances with none. It'd be more like, dubious suspicion with all nations entangling alliances with none. But I do believe that, this so-called home of the brave has been acting like a bunch of, we have a fear-aggression syndrome that's awful in this country. If we were actually ordered the way we were supposed to be, something more like the Swiss, where we have citizen militias, we're trained in the use of arms, and we're ready to prepared to defend ourselves as necessary. I'm not into guns myself, but I do understand that by delegating all of our violence to a standing army that's professional and always looking for trouble, and not that I've got anything against service people, but we were warned about this too, not just by Eisenhower, but from the very beginning. Our country was designed as one that was not supposed to be meddling in other people's countries. We were not supposed to have our armies in over half the nations of the world pointing our guns at the other half. We're spying on everybody. We've got guns pointed at everybody. We've got this, embarrassingly, aggressive imperialist posture that is totally un-American. And I understand that we've gone a complete about-face from having this nation that feels like, all right, we have a duty to go fight, to now we've got kind of a weird obsession where we really we idolize our military. We have this ridiculous, fickle fear of, now it's North Korea. Oh, we're worried about North Korea. Really? Are they really going to cross the ocean and kick our heinies? I don't think so.
Well, would you do anything to stop places like Iraq or Iran or North Korea or whatever from developing nuclear weapons?
What kind of country doesn't have, weapons of mass destruction anymore? And I guess, let me just put this in let me take another tack. What if we were to act like Americans and show what freedom works like? What if we really did have equality under law? What if we made everybody else, aware that we are making ourselves an example of how people are supposed to live under liberty and justice, under these constitutions, and everybody looks to see how successful we are and say, we want some of that. What if we just did that? What if we, instead of, posturing ourselves as the armed aggressor of the planet, what if we were to just, defend ourselves aggressively and let people know that we're not taking guff from anybody else, and if you step, your foot on my property, you could get shot. If that was kind of the old, John Wayne posture, in a way, of what Americans were supposed to be like under constitutional rule of law, and yet otherwise we trade with everybody, we're peaceful with everybody, we mean no harm to anybody. Well, if you're going to trade with us, we'll trade with you. If you want to learn from us, we're happy to, to teach you. If we were examples of what we claimed to be for the last couple hundred years, we would have nobody to fear. Nobody would, people would be looking at our country, once again, as something to emulate, not something to fear, not something to hate. And I think that what we have done is we've made ourselves very hateable. I hate what this country has become, just in terms of its violence, its fear, its division, the fact that, we are even more than ever separating ourselves like, which constituency group are you? Are you gay? Are you, Muslim? Are you this? Are you that? You're male, female? And we draw these harsh lines and say we have women's rights, we have gay rights, we have this rights, we have that rights. What the heck? We should be, flatten all this out. Are we humans or are we not? Are we Americans or are we not? And if we're going to look to see what made America special in any way at all, it was the fact that we did have equality under some very good laws called the constitutions of our state and our federal governments. That was exceptionally different. And if you look at all the high points in human histories, whether it's Hammurabi's Code, 282 laws written in stone, or Urukagina's Code, or the Magna Carta, it was some limitation on government. And we need to get back to that.
Andrew, I really appreciate you showing up today. It was really, really interesting. If you want to get a hold of Andrew Horning, just contact horningforcongress.com, and he'd be happy to talk to you. He's pretty passionate about everything. He'd love to talk to you. I'll see you next week. Good morning.
This year in the Tri-State, 1 out of 8 people will be in an accident.
Would you know what to do?
Pain and suffering, lost time if you're working.
When you call Woods & Woods, you are not a statistic. You are our client, and we will fight to get the money you deserve.
If you're in an accident, call Woods & Woods if you want justice.
If you've been injured, call 1-800-544-2108.
Let Woods & Woods work for you. You don't owe us a dime unless we win your case.
You're watching memorable entertainment television. MeTV Tri-State.